Welcome everyone to AURI Connects Fields of Innovation, part of AURI Connects monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. I'm Dan Scogan, AURI's Director of Industry and Government Relations, and your host for Fields of Innovation. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. Fields of Innovation is focused on bringing together Minnesota's regional ag and food value chains to build capacity and successfully commercialize new and emerging crops. Events will focus on highlighting new crops, examining marketing opportunities for emerging crops, and highlighting new technologies in existing crops. Remember that this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Remember, participants are muted, but you can ask questions through the Q&A portal on your screen. To lead the discussion today, we welcome Allison van der Wal, Mike Feikema, and Grant Breitzkretz. We'll be starting with Allison van der Wal. Allison is the Executive Director of the Minnesota State Cattlemen's Association, a membership-based organization that represents beef farmers and individuals who are part of the cattle community in Minnesota. Previously, Allison worked as a research coordinator for the Feedlot Ruminant Nutrition Team and Iowa Beef Center at Iowa State University. Allison van der Wal, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to all of AURI for the welcome and opportunity for us to talk beef today. This month is Beef Month, and we're very happy to talk stewardship and sustainability of our great industry. So we could go to the next slide. We'll kind of get started. Some people in the beef industry, and when I have these conversations, are a little hesitant to talk about sustainability. And I think sometimes we can relate that to how do we really define sustainability. And I think a lot of researchers and also the the National Checkoff has really defined sustainability in the beef industry through the whole system as the three-pillar approach, looking at environmental, economic, and social sustainability. And what I didn't include on this slide is really how these three interact. So if we'll go to the next slide, I'm just going to touch on some of these three pillars and how they interact, and in hopes that the attendees can really see, as we hear from Grant and Mike, what they're doing on their operations, and really how that relates to the whole beef system sustainability. So when we're looking at environmental sustainability, I know you're going to hear this for sure from Grant. We think of aspects such as land and water usage and the conservation that we're doing on those, and really the soil health. A lot of talk sometimes can be linked to greenhouse gases, methane and carbon, and then even going down into ecosystem services. Go ahead and go into the next slide. When we talk sometimes from a producer standpoint, it can be really easy for us to say or to talk on economic sustainability. So looking at the economic impact that we have, everything from creating jobs, wages, putting back into our communities, taxes that we're paying on our land, and how that's contributing to our whole Minnesota and then nationally economically. We also like to talk efficiency and yield. If we're looking at the cattle industry, efficiency and yield, how many pounds of gain, how many animals can you put per acre, efficiency, looking at average daily gains, and issues in those regards as we're looking at that economic sustainability. And that can be tied back into land. Go ahead to the next slide. So the last one the last pillar is probably the least researched, but probably one of the most up and coming aspects of sustainability that the beef industry and even on a global level, we're still trying to understand, and that's the social sustainability and how that interacts with the other two pillars. So we look at nutrition and health. That's something in the beef industry we've been researching for a very long time. The health that we get from our beef product and the nutrition that it supplies us, and some of those nutrients that we really can only get from beef in some of those high quality or quantities. Animal welfare, that's something that we've been very aware of for a long time, is that social aspect of how we're treating our animals related to housing, bedding, and issues in that regard. Community, what's our beef industry giving back to our community? And a lot of that can be attributed back to our small rural towns. and the impact that that can have on some of our rural towns. Safety of workers. So if we don't even think of, if we think of those on farm, we also have to think about those in packing plants, trucker, transportation, auction barn. Really the beef sustainability is the whole supply chain of the beef industry. And then the last one in social sustainability that we like to talk about is upcycling. Cattle are ruminants, and they're able to upcycle forages that you and I can't eat and utilize as efficiently as cattle can, on taking some of those grasses and turning them to a nutritious, high protein food source for you and I. So I made my portion very short. You can go to the next slide, please. And that's really because I want you guys to hear and interact with Grant and Mike and hear what they have to say and really ask them questions. But I want to end on this slide really to have you guys think about, okay, when they talk, how these three pillars come out and what they're talking about and how they're interacting together to look at that beef industry sustainability on that large 3,000 foot level. So thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And just a quick question or two, maybe before we transition to our other speakers. How large an association is the Cattlemen's Association?
Thank you. Excellent question. The Minnesota Cattlemen's Association, we have a little over 1,000 members, and that's everything from a small cow calf or feedlot operation all the way up to a very large cow calf and feedlot operation. We say that we represent any cattleman that's a part of our association and any way that you raise cattle in Minnesota.
Allison, do you see members working under or on all three pillars that you just showed us, or do they kind of pick and choose a pillar of preference and spend more of their energy on that?
Certainly. I think it really depends, and I'd love to hear Mike and Grant's talk about this when they get into theirs. But sometimes I think it can be a little siloed, and typically it always comes back to that economic, because we know that sustainability practices are going to stay when we have that economic benefit. And I hope you see that as we come through. But you're right. Sometimes people can, as they're adapting sustainability practices in their operation, sometimes we do see them maybe tend to go in one direction of these pillars, but eventually they really start adapting, since they are so all interconnected, to these other three pillars as well.
A couple other questions have come in from those who are joining the webinar today. How do you factor in farmer and farm viability in this social sustainability? Farmers getting paid a fair price that allows them to stay in business and have a livelihood.
Definitely, that's an excellent question and a very hot topic that we are looking into right now. Sometimes I can go into economic sustainability, and that's an issue that we're talking on policy side. And I would love for you, I can put my email in the chat if you want to talk about this more. But what we're really looking at in that respect is probably a little more on the economic side of it, and making sure that we do have a cash flow. We see that issue right now, and that sustainability. And if we can't have producers that are staying in business and having that cash flow through to them, then they're not staying economically social or economically viable. They're not giving back to their small their small communities, and so on and so forth. So I'm not quite sure if I totally answered your question there, but I would love to discuss it further with you.
And then you did mention that you had about 1,000 members currently. There's a question about the average size of the producer. How many head of cattle would your average producer have? And are there lots of smaller members in your association?
Certainly. So I don't know. I haven't actually done the research on our own association. Minnesota Cowherd, our average cowherd size, I should say, in Minnesota is about 62 head. And that is actually above the national. Our national cowherd size is about 43. I would say we have a very wide variety of members in our organization, and maybe Grant can attest to this too. Grant is actually our president of the Minnesota State Cattlemen's Association and has been involved in the association a little longer than me. But our members range from a couple thousand head to a couple head, or about 100 head. So.
Very good. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Next, let's hear from Grant Breitzkretz from Stony Creek Farm. Grant, along with his wife, Dawn, runs Stony Creek Farm near Redwood Falls, Minnesota. Over the past 23 years, they have converted a conventional row crop and cow-calf operation into a multi-enterprise regenerative family business. Their management includes at least a 3-crop rotation with the incorporation of cover crops whenever possible in their 100% no-till cropping system. Cattle are grazed across nearly every acre throughout the year. They use adaptive multi-paddock grazing throughout their pasture systems, and they can now graze much longer and with many more head than before. Their daughter, Carly, and her husband, Cody, have also added a direct marketing enterprise, 10 Creek Range LLC, featuring the farm's beef, pork, chicken, and eggs. They are passionate about healing and regenerating the land and about educating others to ensure that future generations have a beautiful legacy to carry into the future. Grant Breitzkretz, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Well, thanks for having me. I'll just start out with this first slide here. I titled this Grazing Our Way to Soil Health because years ago when we looked at sustainability, we covered a lot of things that Allison already covered, but to us and our operation, it's come right down to as long as we keep the soil healthy, we're sustainable. As mentioned, we're in Southwest Minnesota here along the Minnesota River, so we're on some tougher terrain, tougher soils, and this has been key to rebuilding our farm and making us economically sustainable. Next slide, please. So this is how it started. Dawn and I, we bought my mom and dad out, and we had 58 cow-calf pairs, and we'd graze from May through maybe early September. A lot of times the further will dry, we're out of grass in August. So we were feeding cows more than they were grazing on their own. And I just said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. And I started learning about holistic management and different ways we can manage grass. So next slide, please. You know, when Dawn was working off the farm, I didn't want to work off the farm. So we wanted to increase the cow herd and obviously get through that feed problem we were dealing. Next slide. So we did learn, it took me a while to get comfortable with government programs, but we did start with some EQIP programs and subdivided some pastures. As you can see here, this would have been our first project quite some time ago. Put in water sources, subdivided. And we instantly realized that we had doubled our production grass on this particular piece of land. We had put the same amount of cows on it, but got twice as many grazing days out there. That pushed me. I thought we need to figure out more. We need to figure out more. So next slide, please. That same pasture you saw in that picture, this is a good example of it now. It never used to grow grass over 6 to 8 inches tall. Now it'll grow grass taller than the cows. We went from basically 3 grass species out there to over 30 plus. I think there's over 40 something species out there now. And we did it all without adding anything, seeding anything. We did it through our own management as livestock producers on the land. We just learned how to manage the cattle in a better way to change the environment. Next slide, please. So this is that same pasture. Believe it or not, this is cows going in for their first graze. This is all done with no fertilizer, no herbicide, just grazing management. So what we do in our grazing system here on our farm is we mimic the buffalo. Next slide, please. You know, before man was here, the bison, the elk herds, they all moved on their own, and they moved in great big herds to stay away from predators. So that's the way we move and manage our livestock, as if they're being chased by predators. Hopefully they aren't, unlike what was the story here this morning, but just to keep the cattle on the move all the time. So they take part of the plant, trample a bunch of the plant. That's our fertilizer, that's our herbicide. Next slide, please. So like we're mimicking the buffalo, this is what that same picture you saw 2 pictures ago looks like after we're done grazing at what we consider successful graze. You can see there's a lot of stuff trampled to the ground. You can see we've grazed the tops of the plants off. You can see the ground cover that's there. There's no way we can have wind or soil erosion in this system. The stuff that's trampled to the ground is our fertility program. It's our herbicide program. As long as we keep the ground covered, we don't get noxious weeds or invasive species. And it's taken Dawn and I a good chunk of our life to figure this out, but that's what we do. Next slide, please. And we do this in all of it. I said I'm along the Minnesota River here. If you look over the top of those cows to the left there, you can see the river valley down in there. I mean, some of this is extremely hard to manage, but we do manage it, all of it, all of our grazing, whether it's summertime or grazing season started now, or even grazing cover crops in the winter. It's all managed grazing to put carbon into the soil, increase the fertility, and obviously to produce beef. Next slide. This is something we struggled with for a long time. This particular field in this picture, we collected crop insurance on it more than we collected a good crop off of it. And I told Dawn, I said, you know, cows have been our friend the whole way along here. They've kept us in business. Let's transition this piece of land into a pasture. And we had actually given up on this piece of land. We had seeded it to alfalfa and decided that if we got 2 good cuttings a year alfalfa off of it in a moisture short year, we would be happy with that. And when I learned how to manage the cows for what I wanted instead of what we had out there, we turned this into what you see right there without adding any seed. That was alfalfa. Now you can see right in the front here, majority of this is brome, but there are other grasses in there. And we did it once again without interseeding anything or adding anything to it. This is now one of the most highly profitable pieces of land on our farm. It's just tremendous, the grazing we get off here every year, the amount of beef we produce per acre. Next slide. This is how we do it. We struggled a lot on foot doing it, and then it's like, why don't we figure out a side-by-side and do this? So we run a cow-calf operation, plus we run about 200, well, about 300 yearlings on grass. And we move these cattle basically every day. I mean, if we're going to take a vacation, we'll set them up for a 3, 4, 5 day pass or get a neighbor kid to come and move them. But this is what we do. We got enough, when those racks are full on the side by side, there's enough posts there to build about 6 miles of fence. If we fill the spool rack on the back there, we'll have enough spools and stuff to go 6 miles. Most of our divides and breaks in our pastures are 1/4 mile or less. Some are a 1/2 mile. So we can do this real quick and easy. Next slide, please. And I'm lazy. I love to sit in my side by side and listen to the radio. So I'll throw a bunch of posts across my lap, put my spool on there, tie that off. It's spool and wire beside me. I just step my posts in beside, away I go. We can build a 1/4 mile fence in under 10 minutes. Next slide. This is something that we started doing now in the yearling operation. This is obviously Dawn, my wife, in the Kubota. She's got all her supplies in there. She's moving 200 head of yearlings. We learned that when we moved our water source, we could impact the land even quicker and faster because cattle naturally go to water multiple times a day when they're grazing. So if we move the water source daily, we can have more impact on the land, which heals the land faster, which increases the productivity of the land faster. So here she's got all of her fencing supplies. She's got her water. She's got a rub brush on there. This pasture has no trees on it. The rub brush is to keep the hair out of the water when the cattle are itchy. And she's dragging her salt and mineral and vinegar or whatever else she's got with her for this pasture. Real quick, easy, just tremendous results from doing this program. Next slide. Like I said before, we manage in the winter too. This is probably early January. Really extremely cold. If we have successful cover crops after we harvest our grain crops, we're still grazing cattle into always December, January. Sometimes we'll even make it into February, depending on the crop rotation and water sources, what we can do. But we'll still put fences up to manage these cattle. What we've learned in our operation is cattle on the land, on our tillable land, is the fastest way to heal our land. There's something that comes out of the back end of that cow that can't be duplicated in a vial or a university or a science system anywhere. It's the biology that comes out of that back of the cow is just miraculous for what it does for the biology in the soil. Next slide, please. So this is just a little overview of how we do it. We alter stock densities. We never go through in the same pattern, different heights, different rest periods. And obviously, with the weather we've had, not this year or the last year, but the year before, we had to overgraze some pastures because they were just way too wet to get into and stuff. And it's a disruption. Nature loves a disruption. but we as the producers have to manage it. Next slide, please. After 25 years of doing this, this is what we've learned on our operation, is that if given the chance, nature is self-regulating, self-healing, self-organizing, and it's up to us as the managers of this land to let it do that. Next slide. I was very blessed years ago, many years ago, to go to a seminar put on by Ian Mitchell Innes from South Africa, who taught me a lot about this grazing system. And he said, if you build it, they will come. And then I don't dare put it on the slide, but he says, and then charge the hell out of them for it. And what he meant by that was the amount of wildlife that we got back on our ranch and our farming system here. It's the wildlife that we see is just unbelievable. In a way, it's gotten to be problematic for us also for stored feeds through the winter. But at the same time, that's a revenue source for us in our cattle operation, is now we can charge for hunting, and we charge a lot for hunting, and we've got hunters just about every season that's available, and no shortage of wildlife. Next slide. Dawn wanted me to put this slide in here. It's been 25 years, her and I working on this farm, and to meet all three of the cornerstones that Allison talked about, this is how we've developed our farm. What we're doing right now in 2021, we still grow corn and soybeans, alfalfa for feed. We grade food grade oats, cereals, dry peas, 7 grain mixes. We were planting 7 grains all in the same field at the same time, harvest the same time with the combine for feed. We've got several landlords that we're working on their land now to improve the soil health and sustainability of their farms. We've got the pastured chickens, the pastured hogs, the egg layers. I finally figured out how to grass and grain finish cattle. So we offer both of that to our customers right off the farm here. And the key to making it all work for us has been cover crops integrated into the rotation with cattle on them grazing. It's really healed and helped our soils and kept us sustainable. Next slide. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. And if I could just ask you a couple questions here. We've got a couple that have come in from those who are participating on the webinar today. And I was going to ask you if you feed any grain, but you talked about that a little bit toward the end of your presentation. Tell me a little more about cover crop grazing and how well that works.
It works very well for us. These last few years when we were extremely wet, we're a struggle to get cover crops in timely. But we plant cover crops any and every time we can. Here this next week, we'll start interseeding cover crops into our corn in between the corn rows. So as the corn starts dying, those cover crops will take off as the canopy opens back up and they get some sun. We'll have fall grazing for the mama cows and calves. We do plant a lot of small grains. And for our specialty markets, after the small grains come off in July and early August, we'll plant cover crops on there. Those cover crops are designed specifically to harvest nutrients, hold nutrients. I mean, we still have some manure coming off of our feedlot. So we'll spread manure on those green cover crops. Those cover crops will harvest those nutrients out of the manure, hold them for next year's corn crop, and we'll plant corn in there. And we'll use significantly less synthetic inputs to raise the same corn crop we've always raised.
What do you use for cover crops?
The list is miles long, but the one I gave you for like in between corn will be annual rye, some turnips, some radishes, some kale, and I'll even throw a little bit of vetch in there here on my home farm.
You obviously, just physically looking at your land, could see that it was improving. Did you ever do any soil sampling?
Yeah, we do massive amounts of soil sampling. You know, right now the big buzzword in agriculture, well, in everything, is carbon in this carbon market. Soil organic matter is a really good measure of carbon. We've taken soils here from 1.6 to 1.9 organic matter to 5+ in under 10 years. The key is putting cattle on it to do it.
How long did it take for the native grasses to take over as you started to use your land for paddock pastures?
Their grasses are really slow. They're really slow, frustrating. You never see it as fast as you want, but with the proper management and rest periods, we were seeing species in 2 years. We just took over 300 acres of pasture that we're seeing it in 2 years now through proper grazing, and hopefully can amplify that. It basically to get them back from 3 to 30, took about 10 years.
And I don't know if you want to, we have a question and it's up to you whether or not you want to, how deep you want to get into it, but the economics of what this has done for the operation. I'm guessing you're seeing economic return.
This has kept Dawn and I on the farm. We were ready to pull the pin and quit doing it the other way. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the other way. It's just we were landlocked, we're on small acres, and we thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And it's really worked for us. We do sell some grain yet into the commodity market, and I'm probably one of the lowest cost producers doing it this way. But most of the grains that we raise and raising them this way are higher in nutrient density now than we ever had 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So the way we realize that value is to run it back through our livestock, through the beef, pork, and poultry.
So someone on the webinar today that's thinking about making the same pivot, what's the one or two things they should be thinking about that they're going to need to do?
It's simple. Education, education, education. For the love of God, don't do what Dawn and I did. We pulled this stuff out of hats, out of books, not understanding it all. There's all kinds of producers across this nation now doing what we're doing. You know, YouTube's your best friend. But do it on a small scale. Every farm is different. Every farm operation is managed different. Land's different. Do it on a small scale until you're comfortable, and then implement it broad scale on each and every farm.
Well, Grant, thanks for your presentation and your time today. And if you can hang around till the end of the webinar in case there's some follow-up questions, we'd like to include you in those as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Grant. Well, to wrap up this edition of Fields of Innovation, we're going to get another producer's perspective as we talk to Mike Feikema of Faikoma Farms. Mike's a third-generation farmer. He farms with his brother Sean by focusing on striving for excellence in production, management, and stewardship through the wise use of their resources. They finish out cattle and farm primarily corn and soybeans, as well as some alfalfa and some small grains. Since 2015, they've been doing strip till, no-till on their acres, and also incorporate cover crops as much as possible. Mike Feikema, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the invitation to be on this. I'm probably not near as interesting to listen to as Grant is. So we run down here in southwest Minnesota, we run about 4,000 feet yard. As Allison said, the biggest thing we got on the feed yard side is efficiency. That's what we strive for, is to make as many pounds of beef as efficient as we possibly can with the least amount of inputs possible. We try to finish out about 5,500 to 6,000 head of cattle in a year. That's what we strive for. All of our corn and hay all comes off of our acres. We do a lot of cover crop. We're actually going to cut some rye Tuesday that we will bale up, and then we will feed that to the feed yard. That cover crop thing has been, frankly, amazing in what that has done. Not only
Mike, I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Yep.
We're getting some bad sound from you, and I don't know if it's. I noticed you were rocking in your chair a little bit, or if
okay.
We're just getting some background noises there. So I'm sorry I broke your concentration, but I'll let you start from where you left off, and you sound better already. So
okay, I'll quit trying to rock. I'm not very good at sitting still, so that's my problem I run into. The cover crop thing was what I was think where I left off. That has been for soil health and just for tonnage of feed off of an acre has been tremendous. We try to put rye into acres in the fall after we either chop silage off or take soybeans off. We even put it into corn stubble afterwards. And then come spring, we will let it get to about this time of the year, and we will swath it down and bale it for hay that we then feed to the cattle. We're going to do that on about 200 acres this year. We plant more cover crops than that, but time-wise, that's what we can get to. If you could go to the next slide, please. This here's a picture. This is some ground that we picked up 2 years ago. And I know the cover crop doesn't look very pretty in there, but what we did, this ground literally is dead ground. It has no worms in it. It has nothing in it. And we are trying to basically build that soil up with the use of cover crops. It's in a corn bean rotation otherwise. This was bean stubble. We planted, after we took the beans off, we put rye in. And then there's a sow farm there that puts manure on, so that the manure was hauled after the cover crop was planted. That's why it's a little thin. And then we ran our strip till machine through it. This is us planting corn into the rye right there. I know you can't see the strips. All of our corn acres go in with the strip till. And I'll apologize in advance. My brother is the crop guy and I'm more the cattle guy. So if you got real specific questions, I might not know the answer to that. Let's see. But this is, we do a lot of this. We'll come in and then after we planted this corn, we'll kill the rye off and the corn will come up and go from there. You know, we've been doing strip till now since 2015. The benefits to the soil of that, strip till, no till, all our soybeans are no tilled in and all of our corn is strip tilled. A lot of that was driven solely because, you know, we were tired of watching our dirt either blow away or run away when we got big rains. And also we were fighting a lot of compaction issues with our conventional tillage system. And rather than try and rip it up every single year and then pack it all back down with equipment, we basically took the natural approach and said, let the dirt do it. And the carrying capacity that dirt has with this big equipment nowadays, when you leave it alone, is unbelievable. All of our manure from our feed yard also obviously gets applied to our crop ground. We spread it out. We have manure spreaders that have scales, and I mean, everything, we try to be as precise as we absolutely can with that manure. We've spread to the 1 year crop removal. Yeah, that cattle manure, there's Grant's right when he says there's nothing better to restoring soil than cattle manure. And that is absolutely true. It's amazing stuff for building organic matter and supplying the nutrients. I mean, we've got lots of ground that we pick up. If we put cattle manure on it, I mean, you'll see 5 bushels on corn pretty easily over a conventional fertilizer program. Can you go to the next slide, please? And that's all I really have. I'm not much on pictures. I'm not much of a talker. I guess I'm more of a take questions and try to answer them the best I can.
Well, let's see if we can find a few questions for you or the other panelists. Thank you, Mike, for that presentation. Tell me a little bit about the transition to strip till and what that was like, and some of the thought process of deciding that this is where we have to go.
So a lot of the thought process, and I'll give credit to my brother because once again, he is more the crop guy, but we were sick and tired of spending diesel fuel to tear up ground, to then watch it either blow away in the winter or we'd get big rains and then you'd have gullies and then you got to go fix the gullies. And it's kind of like Grant, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. And we watched a lot of things. We looked at strip till probably for 4 to 5 years before we adapted to it, trying to learn as much as we could about it and how we could do it. And there's a ton of challenges that come with totally switching a system like that. And it's not easy. It's frustrating at times. There was a lot of days where you just wanted to pull your hair out and say, let's just go back to the way we did it because it's a lot easier. 7 years into it, there is no way I would ever even consider going back to what we had. This to us, this is such a much better system. We can use less fertilizer. We get probably as good or better yields than in a conventional system. And yeah, I think at right now we're farming 6,500 acres, and I think we maybe put 450 acres, get a little bit of P&K. The rest of it is all supplied through our feed yard.
And I see Grant on my screen is nodding his head in agreement to most of what you just said. And so Grant, what Mike is sharing with us resonates with you?
Oh, what Mike said is key. What the question of, are we going to make this switch and are we going to make it work? It was a huge deal for Dawn and I. We've been no-tilling some crops here since 1998. The last crop we had to switch was corn. And I told her, I said, we'll try it 1 year no-till. And if we can't make that work, we'll switch corn back to strip till like Mike and his family's doing. But we made it through the no-till part of it 100%. And there is no way I am ever going back. I mean, it just, the savings, the soil structure, all the things that Mike talked about is just huge on our row crop land. You know, and I got a young neighbor here farming with us. He's doing the same things we were doing on our farm. And those wet years we had, on a Sunday morning, it got done raining. We had 4.9 inches of rain here. And he called me and he said, Grant, let's start chopping silage tomorrow morning. And I said, Ryan, I said, we may have soil structure and we may have water infiltration, but I said, I don't know if it's that good. We started chopping the next morning, never left a rut. And we watched our neighbors go out and try to start chopping, and they never made it across the field. And we put up an entire feed crop in 2 days for him. And then we came over to my place and did mine. Never left the track. Just amazing. Fix the soil, fixes so much.
So some questions from our webinar participants. I saw wind turbines on some of Mike's slides. Does he or Grant have renewable energy on their farms?
So those wind turbines, that is rented ground that we have. Those wind turbines showed up, I'd say about 10 years ago now. They are on that particular piece. There is, I think there's a section of ground there. I want to say there's 12 turbines on that section. So yes, we got quite a few of our acres that have wind turbines on them.
Grant, do you have any renewable energy?
Nope, we have none. We're currently looking at solar, or the kids are. They're pushing me and Dawn, but none yet.
Mike, it says here, or it asks, do you strip till in the spring or the fall? And have you noticed any impact on yield? And thanks for sharing your presentation, it says.
So we try to get all our strips for corn made in the fall. You know, we have some really wet, heavy ground, and to get it to warm up, that's our preference is to do strips in the fall. The only thing that we don't strip is where we're going to haul manure in the winter. We will strip that in the spring. And I'm not sure the yield question, if he's talking yield between conventional and strip, or a yield difference between
Fall and spring.
Fall and spring. And I would say if it's fall, the difference between fall and spring strips, there's probably not a difference yield wise. It's more about, I got acres to cover, a lot of acres. And if I'm sitting waiting on my strip till machine and not planting, you know, some years we don't have big planting windows like this year where we can get it done. So that the yield would be there, not because we, you know, didn't make strips in the fall, but it's just a timing thing.
What are the biggest challenges facing farmers that might want to move into a new system like the ones that you guys are using right now? And we touched on maybe some of that a little bit, but maybe I'll let you both throw out a couple of challenges that really almost made you stop.
So for at least us, what made us really pull our hair out with strip till was 2018 and 2019 were extremely wet years, very difficult to get work done, tiny planting windows. And we were having nice days where the ground was fit and we had nowhere to go because we were waiting on the strip tiller to make strips. It was definitely challenging when your corn planter's sitting on the yard and you know you have a day and a half till it's going to rain again, and my planter's sitting on the yard. And if I was conventional till, it would have been a lot easier. Looking back, I'm certainly glad we never gave it a set. I mean, we just powered through. We still got it done. So
Grant, biggest challenge for you guys?
Um, I would answer this a different way. The biggest challenge for producers is right here. It's right between the ears. You, as human beings, we can decide if a system's going to make it or fail. If you're switching to anything that Mike or I are doing, you have to have the attitude that it's going to work. I mean, 2018, 2019, I was threatening tillage, and Dawn's like, no, you're not going to do it. And I'm like, yeah, but everybody else is getting done, and we're sitting here holding our hands, getting nothing done. But right now, this year, we had successful cover crops last year. Our inputs have dropped way back down to very little to grow corn. I mean, it's worth the wait when you look at it over 10-year period. Got to look past just January 1 to January 1.
Sounds like it's good to have a good partner too.
Oh, it helps. It's frustrating some days. My deal is, my dad, my granddad taught me how to farm. So what's the biggest thing we as producers do? We fall back, like Mike said, to what we knew or what we were doing. Geez, that planter's sitting still for a day. Is it going to make or break us? But stay tried and true to what you're planning on doing, and it'll work.
Allison, I've got a couple more questions for these guys, but I see there's one that's come in for you as well, but I'll maybe wrap up with Mike and Grant first. How would you suggest getting other producers, both livestock and crops, to follow your path? Because we still see a lot of those unsustainable producers out there. What's the key to turning the ship?
For us, we looked at a lot of things, and frankly, economics was the one that sealed the deal on it. Was, we could do more with less. We're spending less hours out in the field. We're putting less hours on tractors. We're putting just less. We're using less, and we're getting as much, if not more, through this new system. And anybody that ever asked me about strip till, no till, that's what I tell them. We switched not because of economics necessarily, but that was the one that's the deal. That's what makes it such a great deal in the end, is not only do you get better soil health, you get better everything, you get better economics.
Grant, how do you get more on the team?
No, I would agree with Mike and everything he said there. It's economics, it goes back to what Allison said earlier, the 3 pillars. I mean, it's sustainability. It's, I don't know how much Mike has done this, but we've done a tremendous amount of soil testing on our land, water infiltration. 2 years ago, I had to go down I-29 3 times, and all 3 times it was closed. If Mike and I and other producers can hold that all on our land, then we're addressing the social aspect of it too. We're actually addressing all the problems nationwide. But I seriously think it comes back, I said this before, it comes back to education. If we can get our fellow producers educated, get them comfortable. I mean, there's a lot of input suppliers that really don't like what Mike and I are doing, because we are not spending as much in town to produce the same crop that we are. So education.
Yeah, was there much equipment conversion that was required for either of your operations? Mike, maybe we'll start with you.
Not so much equipment conversion, but being able to get rid of equipment. We went from running, we were running at that time less acres, and I think we had 2 extra tractors around, and those ain't cheap. And we got rid of 3 tillage pieces of equipment that aren't cheap. We got rid of those, and we replaced it with 1 strip till machine.
Grant, did you have much conversion?
Yeah, I was much smaller scale than Mike at the time. I just converted what I had. I mean, I just took my planter, put heavier springs on it to no-till. We built our own interseeders. We converted grain drills to interseed, that type of stuff. Farmers can figure out what they want to do. Since then, greatly expanded, and we are looking to upgrade planters from what I converted ours to. But we did it cheap, and by asking around a few people that had been doing it, what we actually needed on those planters to make them work. And it was a small investment. It was just making sure it worked.
I like your side-by-side fencing machine.
Oh man, that's when that thing goes down, the world stops.
Allison, what role do organizations like the Cattlemen's Association and the Beef Council play in helping producers explore new and more regenerative production methods? How much are you and your organization involved in converting producers to become the Mikes and Grants of the world?
You know, we try to be very much involved, kind of the education standpoint of participating in things like this, where producers are able to talk to other producers on how can they start getting some of these practices into their operation. And we also do, on the cattleman side, we do some policy things. So we've done talking to the legislature about some of these equipment costs. Can we put grant programs out there? Depending on what they want to start adopting, some of the equipment can be very expensive, and maybe they don't have some of the capital that needs to be done. So we've made those kind of asks. I actually work with a lot of other associations with some grant work, specifically with corn and pork. We've been looking at some grants on how can we integrate livestock onto just cropping operations. There's a Midwest perennial working group and Midwest Grazing Exchange to really start marrying livestock and crops together. You heard Mike and Grant both say the addition of manure on land to try to make that easy change on some operations, both big and small. On the Beef Council side, I also have the hat of being Beef Quality Assurance Coordinator. That's a voluntary program looking at best management practices. And one of those chapters is looking at environmental stewardship. So trying to educate producers on that regard of what are the best management practices, looking at soil health, water, erosion, things like that. I guess those are two things. Those are things that we're doing both on the council and association.
And we're going to ask one more question, and then we'll go around the horn to each of you. And it's about Grant. Did you want to add something to Allison's comments?
Yeah, Dan, I did.
Go ahead.
I got nominated to be on the Sustainability Task Force for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. In August, we will have stuff coming forth on this on a national level. We're hoping to have it done by the time the convention rolls around in August on the national scale.
Great. Final question as we wrap things up today. When the three of you look to the future, what do your operations look like? What does cattle production in the state of Minnesota look like? And Grant, we'll start with you.
Well, for me and my operation, our main goal right now is to get ourselves out of the commodity market altogether. We're probably never going to get to that point, but we are getting more and more acres to it, whether that's marketing our grain through our livestock and then direct to the consumer. That's the main goal of our farm right now. What the future looks like, if you'd have told me 5 years ago that I'd be picking eggs and butchering chickens right now and selling them direct, I'd have said hell no. But God only knows what these kids are going to come up with, and so far it's all been working. And that's what it's all about, is the kids in the future. You know, we got 3 grandbabies running around here every day. It keeps you pushing.
Mike, what excites you about the next 20 years?
You know, what excites me the most is just a lot of what me and Grant are doing can be really well aided with the technology that's coming. You know, some of the stuff that we do, you know, would have been hard to do without RTK, without soil, all the yield mapping stuff, to be able to see, you know, this is where we screwed up. This is how important this is. You know, the technology side of things is what really excites me. I think that stuff is only going to enhance what me and Grant are trying to accomplish here.
And Allison, last word. What excites you about the future for your organizations?
Yeah, I'm excited because I get to work with great producers like Grant and Mike. I kind of work on their behalf, and whatever they need to make some of these changes, you guys know you can call me and we can do these kind of things. I wanted to follow up. I know we go through issues in the cattle industry and just agriculture in general, but you see Mike and Grant are both crop and livestock operators. And that's also another part of that sustainability, the sustainability pillars, if you want to call it that. So keeping those going and making sure that beef has a prevalence in Minnesota is something that I'm really excited to keep working on.
Well, I want to thank you, Allison, and Grant and Mike for participating today. It was great to hear your stories, and best of luck in the future. That concludes AURI Connects Fields of Innovation for today, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. Our next AURI Connects Fields of Innovation is scheduled for Friday, June 25th, and we'll be focusing on how new innovations are shaping the future of a staple crop, wheat. Join us next month to learn more about a recently completed study, Wheat Variety and Sourdough Product Analysis for Anti-Nutrient Levels Related to Digestibility. And we'll hear from researchers, growers, and industry experts who are looking at new ways to address challenges associated with wheat digestibility and how to expand market opportunities for the wheat industry in Minnesota and beyond. Again, that one's coming up June 25th. And we always welcome your feedback on our program, so please respond when we send you an evaluation. Thank you for participating today, and remember to visit the Fields of Innovation Facebook page. For more information on Fields of Innovation or any of the work that AURI is involved in, you can go to auri.org.